Greetings and welcome to the CCOF Foundation FSMA Food Safety Inspection Resources and Updates for California Produce Growers webinar. This webinar will review basics of the Food Safety Modernization Act, also known as FSMA, for produce growers, as well as provide updates on the FSMA Produce Safety Rule inspection process in California. We wanted to acknowledge that today's webinar is supported through a grant from the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture and produced in collaboration with the Western Regional Center to Enhance Food Safety. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this webinar are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the view of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Also note, this webinar is not providing legal advice. If you're having difficulties connecting to the webinar, if you can't hear or can't see, please call our office for support at 831-423-2263. Press 0 for the operator and someone will help you connect to the webinar. My name is Megan Donovan. I will be your host today. I'm a program specialist at the CCOF Foundation. The CCOF Foundation advances organic agriculture for a healthy world through education and hardship grants, technical assistance, and consumer education. My colleague, Jacob Guth, is also online with me today. Jacob is CCOF's Director of Food Safety and is online to answer questions that are related to the intersection of food safety and organic. We are pleased to have with us this afternoon Feiereisel from Community Alliance with Family Farmers and the Farmers Guild, as well as Avery Cromwell from CDFA's Produce Safety Program. I'll introduce each speaker in more depth prior to their presentation. Before we get started with the main presentation, I wanted to let you know how you can participate in today's web event. We're looking at an example of the GoToWebinar attendee interface, which is made up of two parts. The viewer window on the left, which allows you to see everything the presenter will share on their screen, and the control panel on the right. Within that control panel is how you can participate in today's event, so let's go ahead and take a look at that. By clicking on the orange arrow, you can open and close the control panel. From the View menu, you can set the control panel not to auto-hide when inactive if you prefer to always keep it open. The audio pane provides audio information. By default, you have joined via mic and speakers. If you prefer, you can join the audio via telephone by selecting phone call, and the dial-in information will be displayed. During the presentation, you can send questions to our webinar staff through the questions pane. Simply type in your question and click send. Throughout the webinar, we will stop from time to time for questions and answers. Today, we have a copy of the PDF of the PowerPoint slides available for download through GoToWebinar. Click on the blue file name of the handout in the Handouts pane. A PDF of the slides will open in your browser. You can view them in your browser or download them onto your computer. To expand or collapse the Handouts or Questions pane, click on the triangle next to the name of the pane. For example, if you can't see the box of the Questions pane, click on the triangle and it will expand to show the pane. And just a note, today we were waiting to hear back from CDFA to see if we could distribute their slides or not, and we've gotten approval for that. But the slides that you will download just have the CCOF and CAFF slides. So we will send out a full set of slides after the webinar. But for now, you have both the CCOF and CAFF slides available today. So we'd like to encourage you to test out the questions pane right in. Let us know where you're calling from and what crops you go. And we're also curious to know if anyone has had a FSMA Produce Safety Rule inspection. If so, let us know, or maybe you know someone who has. And we'll loop back around to that information a little later in the presentation. And just to note, we have a good crowd online today, which is great. And we're going to try to get to as many questions and comments as we can. But if we can't get to your specific question, we encourage you to follow up after the webinar. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Kaylee Feiereisel serves as CAFF in the Farmers Guild Senior Manager for Farmer Services. She provides food safety technical assistance to farmers as they further develop their practices to meet new requirements. In addition to her background in organic farming, Kaylee studied food safety, local food systems, and food and agriculture policy while completing her graduate degree in public health at the University of California, Berkeley. So Kaylee, it's always great to have you, and I will turn things over to you.
Thanks, Megan. So everyone, thanks for joining us today. I'm going to start the presentation off and talk about FSMA produce safety rule part of the law and do a little overview, and then also talk about some resources, and then I'll turn it over to Avery, and they'll be able to dive into more of how the inspections are happening in California and what's on the horizon. So just to preface, I just wanted to say, try not get overwhelmed with all of the details that I'm going to talk about, or we're all going to talk about today. You have these slides like Megan mentioned, and then in particular, there's a number of resources that'll be mentioned throughout the presentation, some of which are on the CAFF.org website under the food safety program, as well as CCOF has a number, and CDFA as well. Okay, so just a basic roadmap here. We're going to first start out with talking about what is FSMA 101. So just to lay a little foundation, if there's anyone on the line that's new to on-farm food safety and specifically produce on-farm food safety, what are we even talking about when we talk about produce getting contaminated? Well, there's three main ways that produce can get contaminated. The first is through physical contamination, like when a screw falls off of a tractor and lands in the head of lettuce. The second is when chemical contamination happens, if a fertilizer or a sanitizer product is mixed incorrectly and or applied incorrectly, and there's too high of a level of that on the product, then that could result in chemical contamination. And then lastly, there's biological contamination, which is probably the one you've most frequently heard about when we hear about the E. coli outbreaks in the news with romaine, or other listeria or salmonella outbreaks that have happened in the past. For the most part, our state and federal food safety regulations really focus on biological contamination for produce on farms. So that's what really the FSMA, or the Food Safety Modernization Act, is really focused on. And what we're talking about today is really focused on biological contamination. Okay, and just a brief overview of FSMA, like how did we get here? What is FSMA? So in 2011, President Obama signed it into law, and then it took a number of years for the Food and Drug Association or Administration to write the different, what they call rules of the law. So while FSMA and the produce safety rule applies to farms at the farm level with your produce, this regulation actually applies very comprehensively across the food supply chain. It applies to farms, it applies to processors and distributors and wholesalers, and also to transportation companies, even to companies importing food, produce from other parts of the world. So it's really comprehensive. It even applies to animal food. So it goes through a lot of the supply chain, and then there's one of the rules called the produce safety rule, or the produce rule, that applies at the farm specifically. And then the preventative controls rule applies more towards like packing houses and food processing, which we're not going to talk about today, but that may apply to some farms if you're doing any kind of value-added product creation. Okay, and then from 2017 to 2019, there was a lot of like education and like learning about how this is going to work with these regulations. And then since last spring onward, we're in what we call like the educational enforcement timeframe and continued education, which is great that all of you are joining us today to learn more about FSMA and the produce safety rule. And hopefully this presentation helps answer some of your questions and gives you more guidance on what it all means for your farm. Okay, so FSMA is not prescriptive. I just wanted to point this out. There are a few parts of the law that are prescriptive that tell you like exactly how many water tests you need to do and some very specific instructions, but there are a number of parts of the law that it's not exactly clear what you need to do. And this is just a little excerpt of one where it talks about buildings and pest control and how you need to take measures that are reasonably necessary to protect produce and do monitoring for pests as necessary and appropriate. So there's a lot of like reasonably necessary and necessary and appropriate, and what does that mean? And that can be frustrating at first as a grower to try and understand what do I need to do, but this is actually really beneficial because it allows for growers to really analyze your unique risks on your farm and put systems and practices in place that make sense for your operation to help minimize your food safety risks. And just wanted to point out the link here on the bottom of the page. That is to the PDF of the text of the Food Safety Modernization Act Produce Safety Rule. So if you're looking for some light, maybe night reading before you fall asleep, or maybe to put you to sleep, you can reference that PDF there. It's only about 20 pages, and check out the law directly if you're interested. Okay, so I'm going to walk us through the 3 farm categories because under the produce safety rule of FSMA, farms fall under 3 different categories, and then depending upon what category your farm falls under, relates to what the actions you need to do to be in compliance with the federal law. So if folks on the call have been through this presentation before and you know exactly what category your farm is in, great. This is only going to be a few minutes here, but if folks are totally new to this, please pay attention, and hopefully this will help clarify to you, you'll know what category your farm falls under. So first, I want to talk about farms that are considered fully exempt from the law. And a farm is considered fully exempt from FSMA if the produce grown on the farm is only for personal or on-farm consumption, and or the produce grown is on the rarely consumed raw list, and we'll talk about what those crops are in the next slide, and or if the produce goes through what's called a kill step, or if your total annual gross produce sales on your farm is less than $25,000, your farm would be considered too small under the law and be fully exempt. And please note that that's not all food sales, that's just produce sales less than $25,000. And then the other thing I like to clarify is what is a kill step? So a kill step would be like growing tomatoes and then having those get processed into tomato sauce or canned into tomato sauce, or growing grapes that get fermented into wine. So it's some sort of pasteurization, high acidity, fermentation, different processes like that. A kill step it's not considered a kill step if you take like a head of lettuce and you wash it in water with a sanitizer in it. That is not considered a kill step. Okay. So these are some crops that are on the raw list, and here is the exhaustive entire list right here that I know might not be the most intuitive, but that's the list we have now. And that's what we have to go off of. So if you are only growing, say, eggplants, no matter how many eggplants, how many acres you grow or how many dollars you sell, if you're only growing eggplants, that farm would be considered fully exempt from FSMA. If you grow eggplants and then you grow lettuce and carrots and tomatoes too, you're growing other crops that are off of this list. So you can't claim the raw exemption at that point. And then just to highlight one other detail with this, when I said on the slide a couple slides back that the threshold is $25,000 for like a financial threshold, that was $25,000 in 2011 because that was when the law was passed and signed by President Obama. So we actually have to take the last 3 years of the farm sales and average them together and then compare them to the inflation adjusted number. So right now it's actually not $25,000 is that cutoff, it's actually $27,528. And very soon, I believe FDA is going to release the 2019 number, so that 27,000 number is only going to go up because they'll keep getting averaged in with the last 3 years. So you need to take your last 3 years of sales. Once that 2019 number comes out, you take your 2019, 18, and 17 years of sales, average them together, and then compare them to that average adjusted number to see if you're under that financial threshold. Okay, that was just a walkthrough of the criteria for farms that are fully exempt. And now I'm going to mention the criteria that farms need to meet if they are considered qualified exempt. Or that's like, you can give qualified exempt as like AKA partially exempt. So a farm must meet 2 conditions for qualified exemption. The first is that the farm needs to have less than $500,000 in annual gross food sales. And secondly, the farm has to sell the majority of their food directly to customers, what the law calls qualified end users. So directly to customers, some examples of that could be sales to people at farmers markets, sales directly to one restaurant and directly to one grocery store, sales at your farm stand, sales through your community supported agriculture or CSA program. Sales in those examples would fall under sales to qualified end users. So you would need 50.1% at least of those sales to be directly to customers and have less than $500,000 in annual gross food sales to be considered qualified exempt. So for example, you could be a farm that is a CSA farm, and you have you go to one farmer's market, and your CSA has $70,000 worth of sales a year, and the farmer's market has $30,000 worth of sales. So you have $100,000 in total. So that's less than number one. You're less than that $500,000. And the second criteria, do you sell more than 50% directly to customers? Yes, you do, because you sell 100%. All farmers market and CSA, all those sales are directly to customers. So you would have, you would meet both criteria if that was the farm characteristics that you had. And then important to note is that similarly to the $25,000 threshold, there's also the inflation adjusted and 3-year averaging that has to happen to this $500,000 threshold. So as you can see, the $500,000 is actually now over $550,000 and will continue to go up as the new numbers each year are released. So if your farm, if you were looking at that and thinking, oh, my farm's right around 500,000, well, actually it's 550 and it's only going to go up. So this is an important element to be aware of when you're looking at this criteria. And then lastly, the third category under farms, under the Food Safety Modernization Act, produce safety rule, are farms that are considered fully subject or need to be in full compliance with the whole law. Basically, these are farms, these are all the other farms that didn't fit into what we've talked about already. So number one, these are farms where your 3-year adjusted gross food sales is greater than 500,000. So you could be a CSA farm where the only way you sell your produce is through a CSA, and you have $1 million in gross sales. So you have 100% of your sales directly to consumers. However, you are above that $500,000 cutoff. So the law considers your farm too big, and you need to get into full compliance with the whole law. Also, some farms that are less than $500,000 in average gross food sales still have to get in full compliance with the law if they do not sell more than 50.1% of their sales to a qualified end user. So in that example where I talked about a farm having $100,000 in sales, say, let's do this different example of a farm has $100,000 in sales, and they still have that $30,000 that they sell at the farmer's market, but the other $70,000 they get from selling strawberries and blackberries to a distributor or a wholesaler that then, like a packing house, that then ships them off to a lot of different places. That $70,000 would not count as sales to a qualified end user. So even though that farm is far below the $500,000 cutoff, they do not have more than 50%, 50.1% of their sales to a qualified end user, so they would need to get in full compliance with the law. This is a table to help break down, okay, so now you know my farm is qualified exempt, or my farm needs to be in full compliance with the law. What are the timelines for this? So technically, compliance dates were in that, what's listed in that first column there in 2018, 19, and 20. And then inspections for the different size farms based on your annual sales have also a staggered timeline that you can see there. And then farms that need to be in full compliance with the law, there's an additional extension for the water requirements for the farms that need to be in full compliance, and that is on the far column on the right there. So I just want to say before we do this audience poll that today's presentation is only covering what the criteria for the farms to fall into those different categories. And so if you're wondering, okay, now what do I do? I'm a qualified exempt farm, what do I do? Or I need to be in full compliance with the law, what do I do? There's a bunch of resources that will, I'll talk a little bit about, and Avery and Megan as well will mention on how you can learn about that. Megan, do you want to do this poll?
Sure. So we're going to launch a poll here. Just open it up. So it should pop up on your screen there. And after hearing Kaylee's presentation, if you have an idea if your operation is fully exempt or qualified exempt or needs to fully comply with the law, go ahead and write in or click what you think is correct for your operation, and we'll give people a couple more seconds to think about it and send in their answers. We'll go ahead and close the poll, and then let's look at the results. So Kaylee, do you want to talk a little bit about what you're seeing there?
Sure, thanks Megan. So it looks like we have about 5% are fully exempt, about 20% are qualified exempt, about 45% need to be in full compliance, and then we have some folks that maybe they don't have farms yet, or their farm service like technical assistance providers, so this doesn't really apply to them. So that's a great spread, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what some record keeping tools some farms that are qualified exempt could use to help document your records you need for that. And then fully covered farms, that's great that you're on this webinar because you'll get to learn more from Avery about how the inspections are going and a little bit of what to expect, and then you can continue to get ready for an inspection should your farm be selected for one.
Great. So do we want to move on for a couple questions? We'll take 2 or 3 questions right now, and then if you have any clarifying questions about what category you fall into, we can take those now. And also while we're waiting.
Also, Megan.
Go ahead.
Oh, I don't know if this is only on my screen, but the poll is still up on my screen. I don't know if that's up on others too. But.
That's odd. Okay, it should be hidden. Let me try something.
Maybe if you just advance the next slide, it'll clear up on my end.
Okay, can you see it now? Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Good. So just to loop back around to who's online, we had a number of people from California, we have fruit and vegetable growers, people also growing cherries and walnuts and apples, and we also have some folks from Colorado. And let's see. Just giving folks a little time to write in.
And while we wait for that, I just want to note for the folks from Colorado, I believe your Department of Agriculture is doing the inspections in Colorado. And so while this is geared towards California and the California Department of Food and Agriculture and their work on inspections in California, everything I just talked about still applies to every state, and certainly like the different resources that are out there do as well. So I would just check for more specifics with your state, that agency that's doing the inspections.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the reminder, Kaylee. And so we had some questions come in. There's a grower packer company that handles all of its sales. Are they still required to meet these requirements?
I don't know if I know enough from what you just said to understand what the question, and maybe if that person could type in a little bit more detail about, are they, is it just one farm operation that's doing all their growing and then packing and selling, or are they, how is that set up? I'm not sure.
Okay, so let me rephrase that. If they have an outside grower, packer, shipper that handles all the sales for the company, does the monetary requirement still apply?
I believe so, but Avery, do you have any insight into this question?
I would have to know more about it. Custom growers are an interesting point in this, and generally they are required to comply with the produce safety rule, and then you have multiple different independent companies, with the custom grower being one, and then the harvest contractor, and then the packing house. They can each be considered part and needing to be compliant with the produce safety rule.
Okay, so they wrote back
clarity
and said that they are the outside grower, packer, shipper, and the product's marked under a different label that's not a part of their farm.
Yeah, I think the best approach would probably be for this company or person to email me with my email there on the screen, and we can talk more about that. Megan?
So we're going to move on, and if any additional questions come up, please write in during Kaylee's presentation, and we'll get to those at the second question break.
Sounds good, thanks. Okay, so now I want to transition to talk about some different Food Safety Modernization Act, FSMA produce safety rule resources. So first, if folks are not familiar, if you go to CAFF.org, and hover over programs, you'll see a food safety option, and then you can go over to that option called Food Safety Plan Templates. And on that page, you'll see a number of different links. This is only a snapshot of some of it, where these are all free Word documents of different handouts and templates for different farm food safety plan components, for different policies and standard operating procedures, and just different guides that you can then take and download them as a Word document and then modify and update them to apply to your unique farm situation. There's also this simplified farm food safety plan that helps if you're new to this and you want to create a farm food safety plan, which is sort of similar to your organic system plan that you have for your organic certification. Your food safety plan helps keep organized all the different details that relate to food safety practices on your farm. And we have a template that you can help use as a guide to have you start to create your first farm food safety plan. And then I also want to point out Kansas State Extension has a great resource for farms that are considered qualified exempt. And if your farm is considered qualified exempt, you need to keep financial records to prove that you're under that $500,000 adjusted, inflation-adjusted cutoff, and that you're selling the majority of your food directly to customers or qualified end users. And Kansas State has a great template you could download at this URL to use as a guide if you'd like some help with that record keeping. And then if your farm needs to be in full compliance with the law, we have a number of webinars that are listed with links here that CAFF and CCOF have collaborated on in the past, like walking through the different areas of your farm that you will need to do certain requirements to be in full compliance. You know, there's certain things you need to do for water. There's certain things you need to do for employee health and hygiene training. There's certain things for a number of soil amendments, different parts of your farm that you need to be doing. So those webinars are there. And then the bottom link on this page says upcoming Produce Safety Alliance or PSA grower trainings. If your farm needs to be in full compliance, you need to have at least one supervisor or responsible person or party attend the FDA approved training. And right now there's only one FDA approved training, which is this PSA grower training. So you can see where the nearest course is offered to you. It's an 8-hour long all day course that you need to have at least one person go to. So if you haven't done that and your farm's fully subject, that would be a great place to start. And then also for farms of any size that have any type of food safety questions, I highly recommend not just going straight to Google, but going to this publicly available National Food Safety Clearinghouse, which you can find out of the University of Vermont at this link here. And when you're on the page, you can go to their search area and type in a keyword on whatever topic you're looking for. I did an example here on post-harvest design, and then there was a number of different results that came up, but I'm showing 2 here on different resources that have been created by oftentimes extension in different parts of the country or nonprofit organizations with food safety experience, or other folks that work in this field and have a little bit more, there's a little bit more vetting going on for these resources than just anything out on Google or the internet. So I would recommend checking out this clearinghouse to see if there's resources for your specific food safety topic or question you might have. And then also the National Young Farmers Coalition recently released this Small Farmers Practical Guide to Food Safety, where they talk about FSMA and other food safety related content, and that's a free PDF that I recommend as well. Lastly, I want to mention how FSMA and the Produce Safety Rule and organic certification have a significant amount of overlap. And if you're already organically certified and food safety is a new topic area to you and you're just trying to really understand it all, I just want to say you've already got a great start because you're already used to keeping various records for your organic certifications, and you'll need to keep additional records for food safety. However, if you're already keeping a record for organic certification that has the necessary information for food safety, you don't have to keep duplicative records. You can just keep keeping your organic record and then use that to help document food safety information too. Also, I want to point out that there's a specific text within FSMA under 11284 that says this regulation, meaning FSMA, does not require covered farms to take measures to exclude animals from outdoor growing areas or to destroy animal habitat or otherwise clear farm borders around outdoor growing areas or drainages. I just want to point that out because sometimes I hear from organic growers that maintaining your organic conservation requirements and different organic requirements may feel like it's against food safety requirements, and they actually can't contradict each other. And there's explicit language like we see here on this slide that that's saying that you do not have to, do things that would go against conservation measures. And then lastly, if you are already certified under the National Organic Program and you're new to food safety, it's likely that you're going to have to do new practices and take new records for worker health and hygiene topics and for water topics, because those are not covered in as much in organic certification that they are in food safety. So I just want to pause again and see if, Megan, there are any other questions that came through.
So again, if you have any questions for Kaylee, feel free to write those in. We did have a question come in for CDFA, and we're going to kind of hold on that until Avery does his presentation. So give folks a couple seconds if you have questions for Kaylee.
And I just want to say while we wait, if you've been, browsing and checking your email and doing other things online, I'd suggest stop doing that now and really get ready to listen to Avery and CDFA because there's going to be a lot of good information.
All right, so I think we're going to move on to Avery's presentation. But again, as questions come up during the presentation, feel free to write in. So Avery Cromwell is an environmental scientist inspector for CDFA's Produce Safety Program. He's responsible for conducting inspections of the Produce Safety Rule on the Central Coast of California, and he earned his graduate degree from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo in plant physiology and genomics. So Avery, thanks so much for being with us this afternoon. I know you got a lot going on, and we really appreciate you and CDFA taking the time to connect with us and our growers.
Right on. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Always happy to participate. I honestly laughed out loud when you said there was going to be a lot of important information and to stop checking your email. That made me giggle, but I was on mute, so you may not have heard it. Anyways, my name's Avery. I'm one of the Produce Safety Rule inspectors for California. Today I'm going to be talking about the Produce Safety Rule and what to expect to moving forward in 2020. So basically today's talk is going to focus on 4 broad topics. I'm going to give just the briefest produce safety program overview. Then I'm going to talk about on-farm readiness reviews, and then the California inspections that have been conducted in 2019 and the start of 2020. Then I'm going to leave you with some resources on how to do some more research if you have any questions. So the Food Safety Modernization Act, this is going to be me just echoing Callie. She did a great job introducing it, but once again, it's a set of 7 regulations for food safety. It sets proactive approaches in that you're trying to, before the incident, trying to control food safety before anything becomes unmanageable. There are some prescriptive measures required, like training and stuff like that, but a lot of it would be not as prescriptive as one would expect. It's just as much as deemed necessary and things like that, but it is a science-based minimum standard for making sure all on-farm food safety. So the produce safety rule is one of the core components of FSMA. It is being implemented in the state of California by the CDFA. We are working collaboratively with our partners, the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, as well as the California Department of Public Health. The program within CDFA that is administering it is called the Produce Safety Program, or PSP, of which I am a member. So one of the first questions I'm frequently encountered with is why is the produce safety rule important to California farmers? And my general answer to that is it is a federal regulation. So if you are a farm that is deemed necessary to be compliant above that $25,000 sales threshold, then it is part of the law that you must follow those scientific minimum standards for safe growing, harvesting, packing, and holding of produce for human consumption. It emphasizes food safety first, and it really tries to promote that food safety culture on the farm. So as part of CDFA, our mantra is educate while we regulate. It's really something that's been hammered home throughout my training as well as my years here. And it's been my experience in the inspections that I've conducted in 2019 as well as 2020 is that the vast majority of the farms that I've been on, there's a very high priority put on food safety, and it's part of my responsibility and my hope is to be an asset or to help educate and close some of those gaps in food safety on the farm while I'm regulating it and ensuring compliance with the produce safety rule. So the Produce Safety Program, PSP team, here is our lovely pictures. To the left is predominantly our office and supervisory staff, and to the right is going to be the inspectors. If you look underneath the inspectors to the right, you'll see a number circled in red. And it is no longer responding to my, oh, there we go. Okay, I'm jumping around a bit, but okay, so the numbers circled in red are the regions each one of those inspectors are responsible for covering. And a little bit about the produce safety rule inspectors within California. And this, again, I'm a California Department of Food and Agriculture employee, so this talk is focused on California. But as a California inspector, here are some of the requirements that we must follow is that we're financially independent and unbiased, accountable to the public, legislator, and industry, part of the public agency mandated to protect the food supply, trained rigorously in food safety standards, consistent and uniform, required to report threats to public health to the appropriate authorities, in this case, the California Department of Public Health. So I mentioned the numbers circled in red underneath the pictures. We've broken California as a large state into 5 different regions. I myself am in region number 3, which is the Central Coast region, from about San Francisco on down to Ventura. And although we are assigned to specific regions that we have more responsibility within, we do travel the entirety of the state. So I have been spending quite a bit of time in Fresno and other parts of the state. As the season moves and as different produce comes in, we will, as inspectors, travel the entirety of the state, making sure that we have doing inspections on anything that is, any produce that is coming in. And this is just to echo what Callie has already said, is as far as farms, we're broken farms down into different categories, large, small, very small, and exempt. Exempt farms being farms that have sales below that $25,000 income. Although, again, it is inflation dependent, so that $25,000 is actually closer to like $27,000. But I believe Callie did an excellent job covering that already, so I'll move on. So, produce safety rule inspections. So, one of the most common questions I encounter is when and who will be inspected. In the state of California, there's estimated to be around 20,000 farms that will require to be compliant with the produce safety rule. So currently there are 6 inspectors, including myself, within the state. So we have a significant number of farms that will require to be inspected moving forward. So how are we selecting these farms to be inspected first? And what we're trying to do, especially in 2020 and 2019, is to get as broad of an understanding in the agriculture industry as possible. What I mean by that is we're trying to see all the commodities that we possibly can, so we can have a nice understanding of how farms in different regions with different commodities, how they're executing their farming and how they're ensuring their food safety. There's a tremendous amount of variability and differences in how different regions and different commodities are farmed. So we really want to make sure we have exposure as well as educational input into these different areas of farming. So right now, we're trying to do as many as possible throughout the state. And what we're using to select farms initially is going to be some level of random selection. So we have a list of farms, and they'll be assigned to each inspector randomly, and they'll be responsible for conducting the inspection on that farm. Is there a cost involved with the inspections or the on-farm readiness review? And no, there is no cost involved in the produce safety rule inspection. Another question I talk about frequently is, what if I'm doing audits? So if you're currently engaged in different auditing schemes for food safety, that's fantastic. We've seen a lot of overlap between those auditing schemes and the produce safety rule itself, and that's fantastic. It means people have a nice understanding and good base moving forward as far as food safety. But those auditing schemes do not make you exempt from a produce safety rule inspection. How long will a produce safety rule inspection take? So this is, again, a difficult question to answer. It depends on a number of factors, farm activities and the size of the farm being big ones. Obviously, larger farms that are more geographically spread out are going to take a longer time to conduct an inspection on. And what we're really trying to do during an inspection is determine compliance in as efficient a time as possible, because we're fully aware of how precious time is for farmers. So we don't want to waste any time at all, but we need to see enough such that we can determine that the operation is compliant with the produce safety rule. So if you have a diverse number of activities, you're holding, packaging, harvesting produce, then we're going to have to see each one of those activities to determine compliance with it, and it's just going to take a little bit longer time. Also, if your farm has spread out ranches 30 miles apart, then it's going to take a little bit longer of a time. Also, observations seen during the inspection. If you have complex observations, they require a discussion, conversation to determine what and if there is a non-compliance or any regulatory issues. Those observations are going to add to the time. And the biggest one probably will be farm preparedness. If a farm is prepared by doing other auditing schemes and they have their records ready to go, they know what's happening on their farm, they know where all of their harvesting is going on, they know their water resources, and they're prepared, typically those inspections will go faster just because they'll go more efficiently. That being said, on average, the inspections have taken around 4 hours, but with a lot of variation either way, depending on the farm itself. So how do I prepare for a PSR inspection? First and foremost, know your farm. Knowing what's going on the farm, know what you're harvesting, where all that knowledge is going to be essential. So we're going to arrive for an inspection with a lot of questions about what and how you're harvesting and growing produce. And the more knowledge you have of what you're doing to ensure food safety, that'll expedite the entire process, and it's a great way to prepare. Have your documents ready. So one of the components of the produce safety rule is going to be the records. So having your training records, your visitor policy, your cleaning records, and as well as your soil amendments records, those things are, if you have them ready, that's a great way to start preparing, as well as a map of the field and your water resources. You can also have a on-farm readiness review conducted, and that has been in the past a great way to prepare for the actual inspection. I'll cover the on-farm readiness review, or OFR, in a little bit, but just to give it a brief shout out now. Also, if you have specific questions, so we had a very specific question just a moment ago about whether or not the farm required to be covered if you have those kinds of specific questions, I would urge you to reach out to the produce safety program itself, and we'll be happy to do our best to answer it. And if we can't answer it, we can also relay that question to the Technical Assistance Network, or the TAN, the FSMA Technical Assistance Network is a great resource for very specific questions, and they will provide it. The turnaround time isn't as rapid as, it could be a little bit faster, but it also will look directly into your question and how it applies to your farm. So it's a great resource, and I'll have that at the end of the slide. So the On-Farm Readiness Review, or OFR, it's a free and voluntary educational opportunity that we like to offer to farms, where we'll actually come out on the farm. We'll look at the operation, the farming activities, the adjacent land, what food safety protocols they're following, and we'll have a nice conversation and try to determine whether or not the farm would be deemed in compliance and what information we could relate to the farmer to increase that food safety, close any gaps that there might be missing. And it's completely educational. We'll look at the growing conditions, harvesting practices, packing house operations, water sources, and we'll do our best to clarify any questions that you may have on the produce safety role itself. Again, we are aware that a lot of the regulations within the produce safety role are vague, so this is the opportunity to ask us specifically about your farm and how they apply to them. Completely free, completely voluntary, a great resource available. If you decide to have an on-farm readiness review conducted, I would urge you to prepare for it, and the best first step to preparing for an on-farm readiness review is to go to the Produce Safety Alliance Grower Training course that Callie alluded to earlier. Yeah, it's an 8-hour day, and it's somewhat grueling, but it provides quite a bit of useful information on food safety for farmers, and it's a great resource. And then being familiar with the PSR and the regulation itself, also a great way to start preparing for an OFR or an inspection, either one, that's a good first step. And then I'd like to note also, though, is as a produce safety role inspector, a CDFA employee, we're required to act in the best interest of the public. So although it's completely educational and non-regulatory, if we see an issue that could lead to serious harm for the public, we are required to report that and to make sure that it doesn't become the possible issue that it would be. So what we call those are egregious conditions. Egregious conditions being ones that will lead to a likely foodborne outbreak. And the example I use for an egregious condition would be like you're applying overhead irrigation right prior to harvest, and there's a decaying carcass in your water reservoir. So it's a clear source of contamination, clear direct route of contamination for produce that's going directly out into the public. And those kinds of conditions you absolutely want to catch before they get out into the public, and try and head that out and make sure that doesn't become an issue. So now we're going to switch gears. We talked a little bit about on-farm readiness reviews, which look a lot like a mock inspection. We're going to actually talk about a produce safety role inspection in earnest and what it looks like. So a produce safety role inspection is kind of divided into a couple different facets. We have an introduction, a walkthrough, corrective actions, exit interview, and then a compliance officer's review. Included in this introduction, I would include our initial outreach. So what we've done to schedule produce safety role inspections so far has been we have a phone number. We'll reach out to the farm itself and try and schedule the inspection. And during that initial phone call where we're scheduling the inspection, we'll try and gather some information about the farm, especially to see if that it's going to be required that the farm has an inspection. A lot of farms will fall into one of those categories that they're qualified exempt or exempt due to size or any other thing. So we try to establish that first and foremost, so we don't, use more time than we have to, and just gather information on what the logistics, what the farm is actually doing during that season. So then after we schedule the produce safety role inspection, we'll arrive at the farm and we'll have a meeting with the designated produce safety employee. We'll introduce ourselves as a CDFA inspector working on behalf of the FDA. We'll provide our credentials. We'll provide a notice of inspection form, or Form 482, that lets you know why we're there to do an inspection. And we'll discuss the scope of the inspection. We'll really try to hammer out what our expectation is as far as what we expect to see and where we'll expect to go. We, as inspectors, really strive for transparency. So it's our goal that you know why we're asking the questions we're asking, as well as you know what we're going to be looking for in the future. We find that as a big help in far as alleviating any kind of stress between inspector and the farm. And then we'll discuss the farm's organization and the day's activities. Farms are a lot more complex business structures, and figuring out exactly who's responsible for what aspect of it, that's a conversation that we like to have. So some of the topics we'll be talking about in the introduction and trying to find the logistics of, we're going to be talking about training, health hygiene, biological soil amendments of animal origin, animal intrusion, water, equipment, tools, buildings, and records. And these are just the broad categories of the produce safety rule itself. So after we have an introduction wherein we define what we're expected to see and where we're going to go, we're going to actually begin the inspection itself. So we're going to try and observe the farm operations as best we can, as efficiently as we can, to determine compliance with the produce safety rule. We're going to ask questions about the practices we observed during that. We're going to ask about other activities that may take place on the farm at other times. So if we're there during harvest in the spring, we're going to ask about maybe what you're doing during the winter, and if there's any other issues, maybe seasonal issues that we wouldn't see during the spring that exist during the winter, maybe flooding events or high wind events or anything along those lines. We're going to take notes throughout our inspection and review your records. So the records we're going to be reviewing are going to be your training records, your records on your cleaning, your records on your water testing, your records on your use of soil amendments. So those are the basic categories of the records that we'll be wanting to look at. And throughout the walkthrough during the inspection, we'll be explaining why we're asking the questions we are and what we're looking at. And we'll discuss any regulatory concerns and explain what the possible public health implications are. After we conducted our walkthrough, so we arrived, we had an introduction, we've looked at your farm operations, you've reviewed their records, we're going to have an exit interview, and we're going to go over any regulatory concerns or findings we had throughout the inspection. This shouldn't be any surprises. We try to make sure you know exactly where our head's at throughout the inspection. So at the conclusion of it, it'll just be a rehashing so we can really get on the same page of what we saw, and we can make sure that we're not, we know what we're seeing as well as recording it correctly. We'll provide any information on resources or technical assistance moving forward. We'll document any corrections implemented during our inspection. So if we observe something like, let's say one of the bathrooms is out of paper towels and you refill them during our inspection, we'll make sure to document them as that being a corrective action taken during the inspection. And then things that take a little bit longer to correct that you can't correct during the inspection, we'll identify a time frame when those corrective actions will be taking place. So maybe you need to establish a new training protocol to make sure employees are washing their hands correctly or anything along those lines. We'll really try to hammer out what time frame you're expecting to correct the actions that we observe. And then we'll answer any questions that you may have about the inspectional process. At the conclusion, the second piece of paperwork we'll issue you will be a Form 4056 from the FEA. And so in total, during the inspection, you'll receive 2 forms of paper from us. We'll have the Form 482, which is a notice of inspection, which happens at the beginning, as well as an FDA Form 4056 at its conclusion. After the inspection, we'll take back the notes we've taken throughout, and we will submit a report to our compliance officer. So we are observers and sources of information on the farm, and then we report out to our compliance officer, who will look over the documents submitted by the inspector, and she'll make any recommendations for compliance actions that are necessary. She'll make those kinds of compliance decisions. It won't be the inspector, it'll be our compliance officer. And then she'll also provide any technical assistance. If you have any questions or need any help deciding what corrective actions you deem required, she'll be the resource for that. And then she will provide a report to farmers in a time frame is around 3 weeks, maybe more, maybe less, where she'll submit a report on an inspectional summary report on the conclusion of the inspection. So what if I'm out of compliance? So honestly, the majority of the compliance issues we've seen have been rather, a lot of them have been things that could be corrected at the time of inspection. And what we're trying to do is educate so that farms can get into compliant. And that begins with on-site education, which we're doing throughout the inspectional process. So we'll try to make sure that we provide the education that farms need to get into compliance so they can be into compliance. Will I face economic or legal consequences? Any farm that does not comply may face consequences. Minor violations handled through on-site education. So getting back to that, maybe we see an employee not wash his hands, maybe there's no paper towels, maybe the bathroom's leaking. Those are all issues that we can fix and fix moving forward, either at the time of the inspection or in a time frame that we establish during the inspection. However, if there's egregious violations, significant or imminent threat to public health, then again, we're going to need to make sure that we act to prevent that produce from entering the public sphere. And again, that's getting back to that egregious condition where you have a direct source of contamination, a clear vector from where it's sourced and how it's getting on the produce and how it could get out into the public. So a contaminated reservoir that's visibly contaminated with a source of contamination of public health significance. Those are the kinds of things that we'll need to act upon rapidly to make sure it doesn't get out to the public. And those can lead to accelerated on-farm follow-up inspections, administrative detention orders, or recall seizure of the product. When can an unannounced inspection occur? So far we've talked about how we schedule the inspections through a phone call, and we really work with the farmer to make sure that we're flexible in scheduling the date of the inspection to work within their time frame. We are 100% aware that farming is a tricky business and it's hard to set aside time for inspections. So we really try to work with them. However, it is possible that some inspections must be unannounced inspections where we won't have that scheduling component of it. However, that being said, we have not conducted any unannounced inspections in 2019, and we really try to avoid this because we feel that announced inspections not only lower any kind of anxiety or stress, but they also work a lot more efficiently. That being said, if a farm is unresponsive or unwilling to set a date for an inspection, we'll be required to do an unannounced inspection. Or if a farm tries to opt out of participating in the produce safety rule, then again, we're going to have to conduct an unannounced inspection. If there's previous produce safety issues that have not been corrected, follow-up inspection is needed in response to a complaint, recall, or foodborne illness outbreak investigation. Those are the kinds of situations that will lead to an unannounced inspection. However, the vast majority of inspections currently conducted have been all announced and scheduled. So here's one of my final slides, just some very limited thoughts about how the inspections have been conducted in 2019 and 20, and the vast majority have been scheduled. Again, we've been really trying to work with farmers to work within their schedule, doing our best to be flexible. Industry has a broad focus on food safety. I've been continually impressed and amazed by how much of a focus the agricultural industry has on food safety, and it's been a really amazing to see the focus that they put on it. That being said, though, having a fresh set of eyes from an inspector on the farm can always lead to fresh observations that can close some of the gaps within the food safety sphere, and every little bit helps as far as increasing food safety. So some of the things that we have seen during inspection in 2019 and the beginning of 2020 is things like forgetting to make sure that your equipment doesn't enter the bathroom. So if you have a holster with your clippers, make sure that those don't enter the bathroom, because that's just a way that they could possibly become contaminated. And then ensuring that employees are washing their hands and drying their hands correctly, making sure employees aren't drying their hands on their t-shirt or anything like that, making sure that their hand washing is using soap and water and is sufficient for hand washing requirements. And then keeping an eye on the bathroom itself. Sometimes bathrooms spring a leak, or the drain in the gray water backs up, and you don't want to get in the situation where your bathroom water is leaking out into the produce field itself. And then cleaning equipment, making sure that the equipment you're utilizing for harvest is cleaned sufficiently. So keeping records on your equipment cleaning that show how and when you're cleaning those types of equipment. And then monitoring your water treatment. If you're using like chlorine to treat your water for any water treatment, your monitoring has to be sufficient to conclude that your treatment is working. So we've seen sometimes that we'll use those test strips to test the chlorine content of water, making sure that those test strips are working and not out of date. And then one of the biggest ones is going to be record keeping, making sure your record keeping is capturing all the required information. So 1112.161 is just the general requirements for record that include things like the name of the farm, the actual values observation obtained during the monitoring, an adequate description of what you're recording, and the location of the growing area, and the date and time of the activity being documented. Those kinds of general things need to be included in your record keeping. So it's great that Cali has those templates. So I would, if you are concerned about your record keeping, I would urge you to check out one of those resources that provide templates that you can adopt to your farm. Here are some resources that give you further information on the produce safety rule, CDFA website, the Produce Safety Alliance website, where you will have those trainings, as well as the FDA website. At the bottom of that list is the link for the FSMA Technical Assistant Network TAN that you can actually submit direct questions to the FDA. And now I'll pause and open it up for questions.
Great, thank you. That was a nice summary overview of the inspection process, and also it's really great to hear some of the things that you've been seeing out in the field that farms can put a little extra attention to. So we had some questions come in during the presentation, and someone was wondering, since the LGMA inspection is done by CDFA, is it still considered equal to a produce safety rule inspection?
So the LGMA audits are, so what we've tried to do in the past is work with the LGMA to conduct our inspections concurrently with the LGMA audit and trying to increase our efficiency like that. And it's been a great way to, streamline the entire process. The LGMA also in audits, the LGMA audits are primarily focused on the handlers as opposed to the farm itself, which makes it a source of distinction, as well as the LGMA is only looking at leafy greens. So the diversified farms that are growing, let's say, romaine as well as broccoli, the broccoli will not be covered in that LGMA inspection, so that will require the produce safety rule inspection. However, if you are participating in the LGMA auditing, then we're happy to work with you. If you feel that it would be a benefit to you to do the inspections at the same time, we'll be happy to take that into account and try and schedule them as such.
Great, thank you. And just to clarify too, the LGMA stands for Leafy Green Marketing Agreement. Just food safety seems to be filled with acronyms, so always good to clarify.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I should have done it at the beginning of the question. And then someone else was wondering, does CDFA have a checklist farmers can use to conduct a self-audit?
So that's a fabulous question, and we know that we've encountered the desire to have that checklist. But getting back to Kelly's earlier point about the majority of the produce safety rule is not, it's not as written out. Like the requirements aren't specific, but you need to do things reasonably necessary to prevent for likely contamination. That checklist, it just wouldn't work. So we don't have any checklist because a lot of the thing is going to be a conversation about how you're making sure that this isn't a source of contamination. So for instance, with animal intrusion, we're gonna ask you questions how you're making sure, not that the animals aren't getting into the farm, but how that you're making sure that contaminated produce isn't getting out and harvested. So it's less of a checklist and more of a conversation.
Great, thank you. And then we also had a question wondering if CDFA conducts reviews of Mexican farms that export to California.
So as a California employee, I am only doing inspections on California producers. That being said, FSMA does have the Foreign Supplier Verification Program, and FDA, I believe, are responsible for doing those inspections. But I myself am not, unfortunately, able to travel out of the country and go to places like Mexico and stuff like that.
Okay, thanks. And then someone was also wondering how much advance time does a farm have to prepare for an inspection, kind of like between the time you contact them to set it up and the time the inspection occurs?
Great question. So currently, again, we really try to be flexible. So I have the inspection scheduled in a month, and then I've had inspections scheduled in the next 5-7 days. So we try to give at least a week, but if it works out well that we can do it like earlier than that, that's fine. If it works out that we schedule things months in advance, that works out well too. Generally about a week.
Great, thank you. And then going back to the on-farm readiness reviews, someone just wanted to clarify that these are still available on a volunteer basis. They had heard that they had been discontinued at some point, so it's just kind of clarifying that.
Yeah, so we're absolutely still conducting on-farm readiness reviews, and I would urge anyone that would be interested in that process to contact the Produce Safety Program and schedule them. We've found that they've been extremely beneficial and really a great way for not only us to get out into the community and provide education, but also for the farmers to learn about the regulation and the inspectors and inspections themselves.
Thanks. And then another question, kind of how CDFA employees intersect with like the Produce Safety Alliance training. Are CDFA inspectors also Produce Safety Alliance trainers? Like, are you teaching the PSA trainings?
I have actually. Not all of us are. So the courses are the Produce Safety Alliance growers training, which we've all taken. Inspectors have all taken that course. And then there's, in addition to that, the Produce Safety Alliance Train the Trainer course for those who want to train the Produce Safety Alliance. And I myself have taken that and conducted some of those trainings, but not every one of the inspectors are teaching those courses, but we all have taken the Produce Safety Alliance training.
Great, thanks. And then we had another question kind of about some farms fall under the FSMA preventative controls rule because they pack for other farms. And does CDFA coordinate to have both the produce safety inspection and the preventative controls rule inspection at the same time?
We have not done that in the past, no. And the distinction between the pack houses that need to be preventative controls and the ones that are going to be fall under produce safety rule is that's one of the areas that we're continually trying to improve upon.
Great, thank you. So I think I'll put one last call out for questions. And while we're doing that, do you ever do follow-up inspections to confirm that people are applying any of the corrective actions that they've been requested to do?
Yes.
All right. So I think we're going to wrap things up. Kaylee and Avery, are there any last words you'd like to say before we sign off?
Nope, just thanks for joining, and hopefully this was helpful for folks to get more clarity about preparing for food safety inspections.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks for listening to me. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to the produce safety program, we're always happy to provide that education. We feel it's one of the most important components of our responsibility.
Great, yeah, and thank you both of you for taking time and walking us through what is sometimes a very complex rule and regulations, so we appreciate that. And just a note too that we will be sending out a recording of this webinar as well as the full set of slides. So you'll have both the CAFF and the CDF slides that we'll be sending out at a later time. So with that, we'll just do a quick wrap up. A lot of these Kaylee mentioned, but just to note them again, there's a really good webinar on if you fall into the exempt or qualified exempt categories for FSMA. There's a good webinar that just kind of reviews those requirements and how you can prove your exemption. And then if you are a farm that needs to fully comply with the Food Safety Modernization Act, we have a whole series of webinars that goes into what those requirements are, as well as the couple that hit on the water requirements. The water webinar has really great instructions on like how to take a water sample without contaminating it. And then also another one that goes more into how you can strategize to have some of your organic record keeping meet your FSMA record keeping requirements. And then here are just some great resources in general for food safety and the co-management of food safety and conservation. Just to note, we have some upcoming events. If you happen to be in Idaho or know anybody in Idaho, we're having some introductory organic trainings for Mart barley producers next week. We'll also have webinars coming up in April on social media marketing and how to draw on customers and increase your revenue at farmers markets if you're a farmers market farmer. The CCOF Foundation is also accepting applications for grants to assist farmers in transitioning to organic. So if you are a newer beginning farmer and looking to go organic, check those out. The application deadline is on April 30th. And so thank you again to our speakers for taking some time with us this afternoon, as well as the audience for participating. If we didn't get to your question, again, feel free to follow up after the webinar. And please fill out your evaluation form that'll pop up on your screen. And just to note that the GoToWebinar, the way they run their surveys, they are attached to your name, so they're not anonymous, but we appreciate all feedback, including how we can do things better and improve. So please fill those out. We get lots of really good information from them. So thanks and have a good afternoon.